you for that kind introduction. We have had some discussion already, and we are still talking about issues which. So, having been in this field for decades, sometimes I feel that, the more things change, more they remain the same. I mean, sometimes I feel a little bit that will I ever see a time where we would talk also about a lot of triumphs and wins? Having said that, let's just discuss the issue around sexual and reproductive health services for various communities that we have identified for this webinar. One thing which we must remember when we talk of clinical services, that all these communities together as a response to a crisis which we all know a couple decades ago. And then from there, really the empowerment evolved, and today we have a lot of knowledge and understanding. And I would like to borrow a little bit from what Abhina has said, that the lack of knowledge and even I would say the lack of understanding amongst the larger communities and stakeholders, which actually is the root cause for lack of services or lack of access to services for a majority of these groups that we are discussing. So let me just elaborate, and I will first start with not really clinical work, but then let's also understand that sometimes even the language that we all very simply use can be misleading, or can be it may not be the appropriate language. And again, I mean, I keep saying this, that I absolutely don't feel comfortable saying the third gender when we are talking of trans persons, because that begets that there is a second gender and then there is a first gender, and there is no guesses, no prizes for guessing that which would be the first gender, and that itself we are setting ourselves to fail. And from if we very simply, and I've seen lot of experts and lot of people who mean well using terminologies which are going to set us for failure in future. The second thought that I keep having, that communities have different needs and different clinical, one can say, issues which require solutions or treatment or management protocols. And therefore, a trucker, a truck driving migrant men will have different clinical problems or STIs or issues which will require a certain kind of specialities. Trans people will have different issues for which they will need medical expertise. And sex workers and women in sex work will need different kinds of, because of their biology. And I would like to hear quote someone very Yuval Harari. You all know, we've all read him, and he says very famously that biology is actually enabling and culture actually restricts. And therefore, we all, the service providers and the clinical protocol makers and people who basically define very high quality medical setups, all come from a base that is the community base. We all belong to one or the other community. And therefore, I go back to the roots and I say that in the medical curriculum, we need to enrich our in college curriculum to add these specialities. While clinical needs for women sex workers or migrant men or truck drivers or others probably are part of the medical curriculum, or that is much more relatively simpler as the clinical protocols go, and the barriers there are more cultural or more you can say mental blocks. Whereas there may be newer needs for medical protocols for trans people, and I will quote one example, and that's hormone therapy. Hormone therapy, long-term impact on liver, safety issues, all of that, enough time will have to go, and we will need to have those kind of research papers, those kind of protocols which keeps our people safe and provides that kind of confidence to doctors who are providing it. I'm not saying hormone therapy is not safe. I'm saying that we require more information and better understanding of nuances of it. That what body mass index, how long, is there a need for a break in between? These are all questions that doctors, and they all have so also the understanding that many times the doctors would like to do good, and they need information to make it safer for their patients or clients, because these are not sick people. uh, we would need to then have a dialogue of both these communities, because then the community thinks that doctors are putting barriers in my treatment protocol. They are becoming difficult, they are becoming they're becoming closed. And I think that kind of dialogue is very important for us to come to a similar pace, so that access can become broader. So these are some of my thoughts, that we have OPDs across our branches for all specialized services. And therefore, our learning, we keep learning, we keep understanding. And one thing, the rule of thumb is that stigma-free, open, and equity-driven service delivery really helps everybody, the doctors as well as people who walk in. And at the end of the day, we all have to remember one basic thing, which we keep kind of forgetting, is that we are all human beings under every other identity that we have. We are all human beings, and we all have a human right to be treated with dignity and consideration, privacy and respect. And if the medical fraternity understands this, and they do, like I tell you that they do, what they need is better clinical protocol, understanding, and a broader dialogue. I think we would be able to do much more. We need to go to the roots of these systems, and we need to kind of strengthen the system to be able to deliver these clinical services. And the last thing that I would like to speak on this webinar is about sexual health. Our own, and I don't tire of saying that our own understanding collectively as a community, as passionate people, advocates, and people who work in this, of sexual health is very, very limited. It comes from a disease perspective. It comes, so whenever you will talk about sexual health, people will immediately either talk about various ways to have sex or infections. And I think this is doing a disservice to a broader health contingent, that's sexual health. And I think we owe it to ourselves to look into these issues very closely and find, or maybe even create opportunities for counselors, doctors, countless people who would want to be part of this progressive movement to deliver on these clinical services. We had a discussion a little while ago about mental health. Imagine a counselor who is dealing with mental health, who is not well versed with the sexual health issues around all these identities. Unless we bring that understanding, that work of that counselor would not be complete. And therefore, we owe it to ourselves, to our systems, and to our medical fraternity to be able to do this kind of academic fundamental work. All other things that we are doing are fantastic, but we now need to go and also look at all these communities from the perspective of their unique needs, and respect those needs and find solutions for that. So I will stop here, and if there are any questions, I would be happy to take.